and I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex. I'm going to be chairing this afternoon session, and I just wanted to say that it's a great pleasure to be in a room with so many interesting people who deeply care and do quite innovative work in the energy transition space. So it's a great privilege to have 4 very interesting speakers this afternoon. And I'm going to kick off by inviting Kayla Ente, MBE. She's a founder and chief executive officer of the Brighton and Hove Energy Services Cooperative. And for those of you who are not familiar with BESCO, it's a highly innovative social enterprise investing in energy transitions, and we're quite lucky that it's based here in Brighton. So, Kayla, do you have any slides?
Yes, I do.
Great.
Just one slide. I was going to talk today. I should give a bit of history on BESCO. I actually have a Dutch nationality, and I moved from Amsterdam to the UK. And when I was in Amsterdam, I was working for a Dutch energy supplier who launched the first renewable energy retail product. So 100% green energy you could buy through this energy supplier called Nuon. And it was there that I was inspired I have a finance and economic background, and it was there that I was inspired to look at the economics of renewable energy, because it just makes fundamental sense and is logical that if you're getting free electricity from the sun or the wind, that it's got to be affordable. And so being a person with an economic background, I made it my life's purpose. And when I moved to England, and I tried to set up a business model around energy services in London. It didn't work, so I moved to Brighton, where I had an existing community, and set it up here. And the purpose of this cooperative is to remove all the barriers to the uptake of renewable energy and energy efficiency by doing a lot of what you're doing for me, which is raising money in a crowdfunding model, and using that money to invest in the local community to create affordable energy for the people of that community. It makes a lot of sense because you can earn an investment in what you invest in the cooperative, and you're transforming your community at the same time. And so I set up BESCO in 2013, and since then, it took me 2 years to get our first projects, but now we have 60 projects that we own and operate on behalf of our member shareholders. And we've finished our 3rd project working in rural communities to see how we can transition these communities from oil to heat pumps. And so in these years that I've been working in the energy industry, of course, I've come across tremendous barriers. And it was really interesting to hear the barriers that this project has come across, especially around the community engagement, and the way that people can get upset about a project that is actually intended for good in their communities, and yet, in a way, unless you can demonstrate a personal benefit to each person in that community, it becomes exceedingly difficult to get your project over the line. At least that is the motivation that we always use. For us, if we can't demonstrate the economics and the benefit to the individual, we're not going to get the project over the line. And so that is one of the important things that I wanted to communicate. But also, the thing about running a cooperative is that when you raise money in the community, you can help people in the community because it doesn't matter. We also have our consumer credit license, so we are registered with the Financial Conduct Authority, so we can give loans to people. And that means that we can install solar on anyone's home. It doesn't matter what their income is, because right now we're looking at an energy crisis where the economics of electricity pricing mean that with the solar array you can offer significant discounts to people who are already struggling to pay their energy bills. And so it's the most exciting period. I've been in this industry since 1994. And for me, it is the most exciting period for the work that we do that we have ever seen. And so I'm grateful to everyone here for what I've learned from your experiences. I'm hoping that we have a very interesting session later on that Rally will lead.
So this was a very good introduction which covered most of my initial questions, but I'm guessing one thing that you've already mentioned and it's on everybody's mind is right now about, we heard from some of the partners that there are pockets and areas in cities and kind of regions with extreme levels of fuel poverty. And with the energy price increase in the UK, we know that this is where things are going to be in a matter of months. So as a city, if you take Brighton and Hove, for example, what are the kind of things that we can put in place to make sure that solar community projects can actually deliver a lot of value to the most vulnerable residents?
Yeah, so when we talk about heat and we talk about heat in cities, we're looking at gas. So there is, in essence, the best way to tackle the problem of fuel poverty is to look at the energy efficiency of the homes. And so I'm also a non-executive director of another cooperative called Retrofit Works. And we work very closely with Retrofit Works. In the 3 villages that we worked on, we worked side by side with Retrofit Works, well, Parity Projects, which is another company, to look at scalable models on delivering energy efficiency at scale. So looking at retrofit design, because in most streets you're going to have houses that have the same architectural type. And so if you look at on a bird's eye view of communities, you're looking at probably 7 different architectural types that you need to address. And once you come up with the retrofit design, you can work with a contractor to roll out at scale these kinds of retrofits. And so we want to bring economies of scale down to the people in communities through energy efficiency. And the best way to do that would be to work in combination with a local authority who has access to funding like the local authority delivery funds, some kind of subsidy that will help everybody be able to access, have equal access to the energy efficiency measures that would be prescribed in the program. So we launched a competition in Brighton and Hove called Retrofit Streets, and everyone could apply for their street to get take action on retrofits. And we had 9 applications, 9 different streets across the city. And we chose the street. Yesterday we went flyering around that street and talked to all the people. We door knocked to talk to all the people, and we're running a big event on the 31st of May to talk about what's in it for them, again, why they should be participating in this program. But a unique factor about Brighton and Hove is we have a lot of students and we have a very high private rental sector, one of the highest in the country. And so the trick is to get the landlords at the table. And when you talk about landlords then, if you can eliminate the upfront cost for the landlord and by making the investment on their behalf in the property, and then get either the tenant to pay you back from the savings in their energy bills at a reasonable price. So when I say that, what I mean is if gas prices go up to 8p per kilowatt hour, and we can get their heating bill down to the equivalent of 5p per kilowatt hour, and then we just charge another 2p, then they're still making a savings, and we're getting the money back for our investment. If there's other ways to get money into the pool so that we can make these investments across the board, we will do it. And even better if we could get the landlord to pay, because one of the problems is you don't see, right now the way that the housing market works is you don't necessarily see the value of the improvements in the increase in the price. And to be honest, it's just pure economics that if you're saving money on your future energy bills by doing energy efficiency measures, that should be translated into the price of that home because it costs less to run. But we're not seeing those dynamics, even though this is the conversation that we are having with landlords. You can demonstrate it in what's called an energy performance certificate or an EPC that you have to get done on that property. So if we can improve the EPC and show a demonstrable increase in the value of that property, then maybe we will get the landlords on board to make these investments that are necessary. But for me, the first absolute thing that has to be done is energy efficiency improvements.
Thank you, Kayla. I'm wondering, you mentioned the role of local authorities and you talked about private landlords. Can you tell us a bit about what are the challenges of working with these stakeholders?
With the private tenants, the private landlords?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we have a problem in this country in that there's always been a way out for landlords. The landlords can submit that it would cost them more to make the energy efficiency improvements than the value of the improvement to the property. There's like a threshold of investment, and if they have to invest more than this threshold, then they can opt out of making the energy efficiency improvement. And so I have spoken to many landlords who just opt out of doing that, and it's very sad. It breaks my heart to see this because we'll talk to the people in communities. I had a story of a tenant whose child got woken up in the middle of the night with a leak coming through the ceiling, and the landlord just didn't fix it. And I was just, when I was door knocking yesterday, one of the students opened the house and I could see a big hole in the roof, in the ceiling, right in the hallway. You see this time and time again, and unfortunately the regulations are not strict enough to take control over the landlords and get them to do the right thing. I think that we can appeal to them using arguments, a combination of economic and of course, the regulation is going to change in 2025, where the homes have to be up to an EPC of D, so that will help, but we're in 2022 now, and we've got 3 years. And that's really not right. We should be, and that's why we're doing this retrofit streets thing, because if we can go to the private landlords and say, look, we can do this for this price, I don't think you can match this price. It's going to be such a compelling argument for them. And one thing that I have learned in this industry is tenacity. You have to keep going. You cannot, if the door is shut, you keep banging on it. Because we're never going to get anything done in this climate unless we are absolutely determined to accomplish things.
That's a great message, actually, to move forward with the great work that's been done in SOLARISE. I'm pretty sure in any of the regions, not only in Brighton and Hove. Just one quick question. So if there was one or two issues that you think are fundamental in order to be able to see a significant increase in the diffusion of solar in places like Brighton and Hove and some of the areas that we've heard about this morning, for you, what would they be?
Well, ideally, I would have somebody on my team who is looking at all the roofs across Brighton and Hove, and we would put together a package to finance and install that solar. So my dream would be, let's all just work together, and if we have information and ideas on what we can do to make a difference for the people of our community, let's do it. We're lucky in Brighton and Hove, we have 2 energy co-ops. And we both know each other very well. One focuses purely on larger scale solar for commercial properties. And we focus more on an energy service model. Ideally, we would do the energy service model. So ideally, say for the Victoria Road project, we could work with the council to implement an energy service model where they could sell that cheaper solar electricity to the tenants. We're working on a model doing exactly that now. It's an office building, but it's the same thing. We've got 12 offices and we're putting just solar on the roof. And we will do it through smart meters. I saw your sub-meter model there, so it's the same thing. We all kind of know the same thing. It's just a matter of getting it done. And so I think there should be a lot more cooperation. It makes me sad that we don't cooperate as much as we could. And I think just opening up the discussions and cooperating a lot more is going to yield tremendous synergistic value to our communities.
Great, thank you very much. I just have to say that this is such a great message to keep banging on closed doors and to keep opening doors through cooperation, as we've seen with the SOLARISE project today. Kayla, you can stay on the podium if you want, or you can briefly sit down, because now I would like to invite Dr. Karen Barras, who is a policy and research manager for UK 100. Apologies in my haste earlier at the start of the session to kind of greet everyone. I did forget to say that the way we're going to do this is we're gonna give an opportunity for our speakers to present, ask them a few questions to better understand how they can contribute to things, and then bring them together on the podium and open up for questions from the audience in the room and online. But just a brief introduction to Karen. She's a very experienced researcher, campaigner, and advocate for climate change governance. And she's particularly interested in and have spoken for the solutions which are available to tackle climate change. For those of you who are not familiar with the UK context, UK 100 is a network of really ambitious local government leaders who are focused on delivering solutions to climate change, clean air policy, clean energy, and facilitating net zero. So I'm pretty sure you're more interested in what Dr. Karen Barras has to say in this, so please take the stage.
Thank you very much. That was a great introduction to UK 100, so we can move on. So I just want to echo Kayla's sentiments that collaboration is key, that we have the opportunity to learn from each other. And UK 100 is kind of that played out in scale across the UK. So we have 101 members, which is very exciting. We need to change our name. And we are a network of the most ambitious. So what we mean by ambitious is they're committing to deliver net zero faster than the national government. So within our member communities, we will expect to reach net zero by 2045 and for the council operations by 2030. So not long to go. But UK 100 exists to enable local authorities to share knowledge with each other, to collaborate peer-to-peer, but also we have an important role to play in amplifying the voices of our local authority members to the national government and advocating for changes that will make it easier for them to deliver on those targets. And I think it's probably worth mentioning that the role that local authorities can play is being increasingly acknowledged by the broader actors within the policy landscape. So obviously UK 100 exists because we appreciate that local authorities can enact change in a more place-based, sensitive way. So local authorities know their communities, they know their context that they're operating in. They can develop and understand solutions that will work in any given context. And last year, both the Committee on Climate Change and the National Audit Office highlighted the role that cities and local authorities can play and should be playing in net zero delivery. So we understood this, they understood this, and then in the government's net zero strategy, the national government also identified that local authorities have a key role to play. So I've just taken out this excerpt from the net zero strategy, which came out in October last year. We will take a place-based approach to net zero, working with local governments to ensure that all local areas have the capability and capacity for net zero delivery as we level up the country. So the clear indication there that local authorities have a role to play. I've got another excerpt in front of me that I just want to read out. I wanted to make sure I did the government justice, so I've written it word for word. But we will empower local leaders to kickstart their own net zero initiatives, taking responsibility for improving their area and shaping their own future. So a very, very strong indication there of the role that local authorities should be playing in reaching the government's ambitions for net zero by 2050. To give you a little bit more information about the specific policies that are outlined in the net zero strategy. So fully decarbonise the power sector by 2035, 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030 with more onshore wind, solar and other renewables. There is a call for cheap British renewables to be available to enable us to reach this target, and for a sustained increase in the deployment of land-based renewables such as locally supported onshore wind and solar in the 2020s and beyond, and a confirmation that contracts for different method of enabling payment for solar and renewable deployment will continue. Fast forward 5 or 6 months, and obviously we find ourselves in a little bit more of a different situation with the so-called trilemma of reaching net zero, energy security concerns and the cost of living crisis. So a couple of weeks ago, the government came out with the energy security strategy, and it's worth flagging some of the contextual changes that have occurred in the following months from the net zero strategy. So the security strategy, which isn't very long, but makes some clear strategic changes and direction. It was confirmed that there would be no change to planning requirements for enabling onshore wind, and that rather ambiguously, local communities will be put in control and the government will consult on local partnerships. We're still waiting for details about what that could mean in practice. But there were some positive signals sent with regards to solar, so radically simplifying planning processes, which is very welcome, and considering the best ways to make best use of public sector rooftops. So again, we're still waiting for confirmation of the details. I just want to pick up again on Kayla's point, because I also think that energy efficiency is a very, very key part of this, and the demand side response within the strategy was largely missing, as was this acknowledgement of the role that local authorities can play. So we see a rather significant shift away from focusing on a mass scaling up of renewables towards more exploitation of fossil fuels, nuclear energy, and carbon capture and storage. So there's a little bit of a shift in direction that I think we need to certainly keep track of. We at UK 100 will be watching this as it evolves, but I think that ultimately there's a little bit more of an uphill challenge that we face now as cities in the deployment of renewables, and we'll certainly be continuing our business as usual to advocate for clearer signals for local authorities to make it easier for them to deploy net zero and renewable energy solutions and not harder. I want to spend the rest of the time talking with you today about some of the research activities that we've done. So PowerShift is a report that we produced last year. It has been referred to as the Bible for local authorities when it comes to the powers and options that they have to deploy net zero solutions. Obviously, energy is a key part of the report. It's the most comprehensive examination of what local authorities can do currently to deliver their net zero targets, but more importantly, perhaps what the barriers are and where changes need to be made to enable them to go further and faster. So in terms of the key recommendation that comes out of PowerShift relating to renewable energy is the concept of local area energy planning. So our 3 key recommendations in our vision for how we get to net zero by 2045 is that we need to have a national framework for local area energy planning, which acknowledges and gives local authorities a greater role, more powers and competencies to deliver local and regional authorities a balanced net zero energy system. To do so, we need to have a mix of large-scale power generation with local decentralized energy, and I've seen some fantastic examples today that I'm going to take away and share with the membership about what's possible, because I think that as UK 100 represents not just cities but also rural areas, heritage buildings are a key challenge for our network, so there's been some really fantastic information that I can take back today. And also the final recommendation from the PowerShift report was to enable a clear remit to base planning decisions on our Climate Change Act, which commits us to delivering net zero. In terms of the specifics, so what policies we would like to see enacted to enable that local area energy planning to come to fruition, we need a supporting policy framework in our national planning policy to ensure that every area has a net zero local area energy plan, because otherwise we find ourselves in a race to the bottom where the most ambitious go as fast as they can and as a larger scale as they can, whilst those less resourced, smaller local authorities are left behind, and we end up with a patchwork. So we need a national framework to enable that to happen. We need infrastructure funding in anticipation of need. So instead of building bit by bit, case by case, as we get the money, we need the money now, and we need the money to be scaled so that we can put that infrastructure in, knowing we're going to need it. We can convince further education, higher education entities that there is a demand for the jobs, that they should be investing in the skills courses to enable the gaps that we currently face to be overcome. We know now from the energy security strategy that we're not going to get this, at least for a little while, but there is a big element, which is the onshore ban, effectively, which came into place in 2015 on onshore wind, which needs to be removed if we're going to deliver on these targets. So I think that at least for the most ambitious local authorities, a power to override that is key. And finally, a power to refuse fossil fuel projects in any given area if it isn't aligned with the national carbon target. So this is our wish list. This is what we're asking for. This is what we're advocating around. And I think across all of the sectors that we cover in PowerShift, there are 4 key things that local authorities need in order to be able to meet their ambition and succeed in reaching their targets. And that is control and oversight over what they want to do and how they can do it. It was recognised in the net zero strategy that local authorities have a significant role to play, and that needs to be acknowledged across government strategy and played out on the ground. There is a real need for capacity and expertise. The reason I asked the skills question to our colleagues from Brighton and Hove earlier is because it's a real challenge for everybody. Building up the capacity, building up the expertise, especially after a long time in the UK where we've had financial constraints placed on our local authorities. This is key. We need to see longer term funding for local authorities, not a competitive pot by pot, project by project approach, because there's a lot to do. We need to be investing in it. And finally, I think we need consistent local and national messaging. Now, this is kind of a utopian thing, I think, but if we could achieve that, we could fix all of our social, environmental and economic problems all together. But I think that within the strategies we have, within our membership of ambitious local authorities, there is that political will there. We just need to connect that with the tools and resources that are required to deliver. Now, I just want to say that there is fantastic work out there. We've seen it today. And it's almost being achieved in spite of the national context instead of because of it. But I just want to highlight one particular example. Another of our members, UK 100 Bristol, has taken a really rather ambitious leap towards the sort of scale and pace of delivery that everybody needs to be getting on board with. So over the next 20 years, Bristol has committed 424 million of initial investment in a project that will revolutionise the energy system across the city. And what for me is particularly unique but needs to be mainstreamed is this idea of generating capital to continue to pay for itself. So it's the business model in Bristol that is so innovative and that will take us to the next scale. So I would urge everybody to have a look at Bristol City Leap if you're not already familiar with it, because I think, at least in the UK context, this is the sort of project, this is the direction that we need to be heading in order to deliver on that ambition. So look forward to hearing your questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This was a very interesting presentation covering a lot of complex policy. So what we have seen is there is a lot of innovation on the ground. There is a lot of incoming policy from government. But I think it will be useful if you can just summarize, why is it the cities needs to get involved in the diffusion of renewables in the next decade?
I think because of how quickly and how fast we need to scale things up. So we understand that we need an energy system transformation. Not all of that can happen from the top down. Not all of it can happen from the ground up. We need these intermediaries who have a role to play, who understand their communities, who, as Kayla said, have access to funding, to financing, and are trusted within their local communities to deliver. So I think it's about the role that they can play, not just in terms of investing in projects for their own kind of operational emissions, which in some areas can be quite significant, but it's about convening people within the local community. They have a role to play not just in the infrastructure, but in the skills, in the education, in the delivery of social care. And I think that there are some really, really important co-benefits to delivering renewable energy, to delivering net zero, that can be achieved if you have an entity that is capable of looking not just at one agenda. So, for example, UK 100 is working on a project at the moment which looks at the synergies between tackling net zero and clean air at the same time. And there are a lot of win-wins. There are some contradictions, but in terms of being able to improve health, improve air quality, reduce emissions, local authorities operate at the scale that makes those things easier to do.
Great, thanks. It seems that proactive intermediation, it's something that we've seen great examples of today in the SOLARISE project, but it's something that local authorities have to start doing as a business as usual. So you talked about that, both Kayla and you touched on the fact that the idea of these projects will have to be sold to residents, and that's essentially linked to the economic, social, and environmental values that they offer. So what can cities actually do to make sure that renewable energy creates more of these social, environmental, and economic values for residents?
I think engaging the residents in the decision making is probably one of the most key things that they can do. We've seen in the UK the increase in more deliberative democracy and involving people in climate assemblies and helping them co-create that vision for what they want the future city to look like. And I think that in doing that, it's much easier to bring the communities, the residents along for the journey because they feel empowered by it, they feel engaged in it. And I think by hearing different perspectives, it's easier to put real life in the lens of social justice and economic renewal of a given area. If you bring the residents in, you bring the businesses in, you bring the civil society in with any given community, you come up with a common vision. And I think that if people feel empowered by that, then they're more likely to understand why we're doing this and also take some part in ownership of that.
If you had, from your perspective, if you had to give advice on a consortium of very ambitious and invested local authorities, academics, and business partners, for what are the kind of things that they need to build into a type of project which could be SOLARISE 2, what would you advise?
So I think taking on board all of the lessons that have been learned from the SOLARISE 1 project is probably the most important, so that we're not starting again from scratch. But I think that we know that there are, so Kayla said at the beginning, her goal in setting up the Brighton and Hove ESCO was to remove all the barriers. And I think that the reality we live in at the moment means that there are potentially barriers that we don't know about yet, which is going to be a problem, I think, but we're not going to know that unless we strive forward. So I think that we know that there is a need for regulatory reform in order to be able to scale things up. But I think that bringing those insights, bringing the different perspectives together is really important. So I think my chief executive always says, you don't need to pretend that you know everything about everything in this situation. You just need to bring what you know to the table and co-create the solutions that way. And I think that's probably what I would advise, is just come together, hammer out what those details might be. Where are the challenges? Where are the really thorny problems that we need answers to? And then co-create that knowledge, identify who plays what role, who's responsible for what, and try and ramp up the activity that you're currently doing.
Great, thank you very much. I hope someone was taking notes. Kayla, would you like to join Karen on the podium, please? I can see that we have quite a few questions coming up from the people who are on Zoom. So there is an interesting question from, I don't know whether you two have met before, but it sounds like you should be working together.
We have met before, actually, online.
That explains a lot.
Yeah.
Not in person.
Yeah.
That's funny.
So we have an interesting question, and it comes from Tom Broughton, who says, do you think Ofgem's recently announced review into local energy system operation is worth supporting? I'm guessing that this is primarily a question to Karen.
Yes, is my answer. I think it is, definitely. Ofgem are obviously a significant stakeholder in this energy transformation that we know we need to undergo. And I think that over the course of the business planning process that they're currently in, the coin is really dropping for them in terms of the importance of local going forwards. And having taken the time to put out a call for input about what the future of local governance looks like in this space sends a really strong message that they understand the importance of local areas and local area energy planning, and understanding how all the pipes and wires are going to fit together in the future, knowing that we need, as I said in my slides, a more decentralized system that is capable of being more resilient and more flexible. Yes, I think it's a good thing, and we will certainly be responding as UK 100.
Great, thanks. I'm wondering, Kayla, whether you have an opinion on this, about whether you think Ofgem, their recent announcement into local energy system operation is actually worth supporting, or do you think that the regulator should be doing a lot more?
Yeah, I mean, BESCO was mentioned in a report from Ofgem in 2018 as the local energy archetype. And the funny thing is, we were mentioned in the report, but they never talked to me. I wrote to them and I said, thanks for mentioning us in the report, and I never got a reply, which is funny. But yes, we will be responding. For me, local energy just makes a lot of sense. Every project we look at now, we look at how we're going to generate the electricity to electrify transport and heat. It's like part of the mix. It's got to be part of the mix of delivering affordable energy. The big white elephant in the room is the DNOs and their requirement to upgrade the network. And how is Ofgem going to ensure that the amount of investment that is required will be made? Personally, I think that is the big limiting factor. And I was really surprised to see that it wasn't number one on the national government's list for the energy strategy. It should be investment in local networks. That should be number one.
Yeah, who pays for the investment is a very complex question. When no one's putting up their hand and saying, well, it makes sense that the cost lies with us, or perhaps we need more innovative business models, as well as new ways of thinking about how we make sure that we are investing strategically and ahead of time. On time,
yeah.
Every time. I just want to check whether there are any questions in the audience. Oh, right. Okay. In order of raising hands, yes, that's a very good order.
Afternoon, Kayla. And this is a question for Kayla. I was really interested in your retrofit streets initiative, and I just wondered in that. What level your retrofit of EPC rating your retrofit was going to reach? Was it the sort of like what seems to become the default EPC C, or were you actually going to go for what we need to get to before 2050 of nearly zero carbon?
Thank you, Andrew. For the retrofit streets project, where the community we're working in, I would say the average age of those houses is about 150 years old. And in Brighton and Hove, we have the particular challenge of a structure with the cavities filled with bungarouche. And so we are a little bit restricted in measures that we could take. My philosophy in this approach is let's get it up to a C if we can. I would like to get our homes up to that they're legitimately heat pump ready. I think that will be the philosophy that we use. So, and we think that an EPC C is good enough for a heat pump.
Great, thank you. I've seen that someone else has a mic, so please go ahead.
Pass it over. Yeah, it's just an observation and also a question to both of the speakers, because I wonder what your reaction is really when you hear, on one hand, the government trying to support an energy strategy for the country, but on the other hand, taking it away. We know on the 29th of March of this year, the UK government ruled out windfall tax on North Sea oil companies to help fund discounted energy bills, and could have also used that tax to fund long-term investment in renewables. It must be really disappointing to be in your areas of expertise and to see these opportunities constantly compromised. Are you now lobbying government for those sort of real changes to their strategy? Because it seems to me the planning system works for the government when it wants it to work. So, for example, with the 5G infrastructure that's gone in without any opposition, because actually it's regulated through the unregulated through the planning system, but we can't have wind farms.
Yeah.
Answers on a postcard.
So I think yes is the short answer for that. It is frustrating, and I think those mixed messages and the confusing signals that the government is giving on the one hand, clearly leading on the net zero agenda in rhetoric versus the Queen's speech, the bills that have been announced coming out, because there are some real key opportunities that have been missed. As I mentioned, the lack of demand side response featuring in the bill, the lack of, as you say, the onshore wind alterations, and also the lack of acknowledgement of the role that local authorities can play. So I appreciate how kind of the policy landscape has changed over the past few months. I appreciate that the government has challenges that perhaps couldn't have been foreseen, or maybe could have been foreseen with a more kind of aggressive, proactive stance many years ago. But I think that we are in an uncertain time, but there are some clear wins that we know can be delivered, that can be deployed sooner rather than later, that we don't have to wait for. And it's really disappointing that we haven't seen those.
If I could just say with the windfall tax, I think it's ironic that they're not making the oil and gas companies pay a windfall tax, but they are asking the wind generators to pay back on the excess on the CFD. So obviously there is some there is some prejudice there. Why can't wind generators keep the money and invest that in further wind projects?
Great. Kirsten, I think you were next.
Hi, thanks. I guess my question is about scale. And so we know that in our area, there are plans coming forward for some absolutely huge solar farms, absolutely massive, many fields worth of land. And those are being put forward by some of the biggest energy companies, so like Scottish Power and so on. Clearly, as a local authority, the municipalities, all the projects that we've heard about today are not on that scale. We're trying to sort of find the niches, we're trying to find the points where we're able to add value to create those co-benefits, to get people's buy-in. We're not just going in and saying, we're going to sort of have a massive solar farm, because we can't do that. We don't have the financing, the legal power, the political will, and so on. So I guess my question is just, what do you think is the niche that cities should be playing in this landscape that's in front of us?
I think getting us from where we are to the scale that you've just talked about, Kirsten, will need transformation. So as I alluded to, and as you've mentioned, there is a gap at the moment. We're still, as much as we want to be further ahead, we're still very much in pilot, feasibility, proof of concept, but we need to be moving towards that kind of implementation of scale. So I think that local authorities, cities can play a role in taking that next step, or at least convening the people that will enable that next step to be taken. So I think I was having a chat earlier about kind of where it makes most sense for a lot of effort to be placed. Are we talking at the regional level? I know John's here from the Net Zero Hub. It is a more regional approach, a better way to get us started on this, as opposed to individual local authorities by local authorities trying and navigating those same challenges at the same time. We don't necessarily have time to do that, but I think that taking the learning that we have from the ambitious local authorities like Brighton who have already started doing this. I think that's a real important role to play. So I think that keep doing what you're doing. And I think that as things become easier by more feasibility, by more learning, by more studies, that role may evolve, and you may be in a position where you have that political will, where the finance starts to come. There are some interesting landscape changes taking place at the moment in terms of the advent of the UK Infrastructure Bank, which is going to play a role in both helping local authorities with that technical support and investing more money than I think has been previously possible. So I feel like we're in an interesting time whereby we might be taking that next step. And I think that local authorities, as they have done, are continuing to push the boundaries, and I think will help with that transition towards the bigger, more impactful projects.
Great, thank you very much. John, I believe that you have the mic.
You. Yeah, you've kind of answered some of what I was going to ask there anyway. But yeah, I'm from one of the base-funded local net zero hubs. So yeah, we're here as part of that offer to local authorities regarding capacity and expertise. You can call on us to get some project support for your net zero delivery plans within local authorities. So my question was, for both community energy and your members in UK 100, yeah, we're still a relatively small team, but growing, and where can we best focus our time and resources to help your members progress?
One of the biggest challenges we have is supply chain. It's very, very difficult to find a solar installer who's going to put 4 kilowatts on a roof, on a residential roof now. I think when the feed-in tariff went in 2010, we saw a surge up to 4,000 qualified solar installers. I think the number has declined back down to where it was before the feed-in tariff at like 600, something like that. So we have a very serious problem in that people will call us and say, we want solar, and we can't find people who will install it. We can't find the builders who are going to put in insulation. Our closest insulation installer is in Southampton, and I also know that the contractor we work with works with him. Cavity Tech, probably everybody knows Cavity Tech. And so it's a real problem. The supply chain is our biggest issue, and we do some work. I was working with one of the councillors on trying to get, because we have a technical education school here in Brighton and Hove, and I was working with this councillor to see if we could start getting some courses done where we could start training people. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. We could create jobs, we can stimulate the economy, and we can really solve our problem with energy efficiency all in one go. But we're not working on it. And I think that if we had some leadership from the energy hubs, because I know that you're doing a study on the supply chain, I don't know where you are. But it would be absolutely gorgeous if we could build a supply chain.
Yeah, I'd just like to reflect that the problems that you're experiencing are experienced across the UK. So there is a huge skills deficit. You have councils like Cambridgeshire who identified that if they retained their energy team in-house, it could save the council money. And it did that 10 years ago, and now therefore it has a really, really well-resourced, expert team who know what they're doing and are innovating faster and trying new business models. As you mentioned it, that's one of the key challenges, trying new things, being able to innovate, because they've retained and built that capacity. But they are an anomaly. They are not they're not normal in that respect. And just as you have one guy in Southampton, I tell you, the heat pump installer in Kent is famous because he's like the only person there. So I think that the net zero hubs, it would be good to understand a little bit more how your new remit in terms of a net zero versus an energy hub is going to play out, because I think having that understanding is going to be crucial for our local authority members to understand where they can seek your advice and input. But I think, yeah, giving them information and insight about where the suppliers are, about the successful projects that have been implemented and how they were done, and just helping to bridge that expertise gap, because a lot of councils are still running a bare bones staffing unit on this. And I think also in terms of the levels of expertise outside of the energy/environment departments within the council, there's a huge role to play there in terms of building the expertise and helping other people within the council understand why this is so important.
I will also say that Community Energy England has put together a group of the leading community energy groups across the country, and we're going to be meeting with BEIS on a regular basis to feed in on what we think can happen to strengthen the local energy plans and our communities. I think local authorities have been really challenged, and I can only talk about Brighton and Hove, where, you know, when I came here 10 years ago, I think we had 10 people in the sustainability group, and then over time it was eroded, whereas we only had one left, and I know that they're restaffing, but you also lose all that knowledge. And in Brighton and Hove, we have two very strong community energy groups who can fill the gap. And so I think local authorities might tend to look internally for skills, but I don't see any reason why they can't work with the skills that are in their community, existing in the community, kind of thinking outside the box on how to get to accomplish at least cost, because that's what we're talking about. Doing what we need to do at the least cost to the consumer.
Great. This will be a great opportunity for any installers in the room or online to pass their business cards around the room. We have come to time at this very interesting segment of the panel this afternoon. Thank you very much, both Karen and Kayla. I think you make a great team, and I think there's a lot of things to follow up on, not only from the Net Zero Hub, but local authorities, and hopefully a second kind of consortium to continue on all the good work. Thank you very much. So those of you like myself who basically exist almost entirely on water, air and coffee will be very pleased to know that there is a comfort break built in here. So for those of you who are in person in the room, we will see you back here for 3:20. For those of you who are online, I believe that if you're outside of the UK, you will likely be back at 4:20 p.m. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in about 20 minutes.